Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. Porcelain is a common item found in everyday homes, but did you know it dates back 1,000 years? We're at Winterthur checking out several collections of beautiful, fine porcelain. We're going to learn about patterns and what they mean. I guarantee by the end of the show, you're going to be checking out your cabinets looking for treasures. Get ready to dish. The 302 is headed your way. Hey there, if you don't know what Chinoiserie is, you're about to find out. We are at Winterthur and we are taking a look at the Leo and Doris Hodroff collection. I'm joined now by Leslie Grigsby. She is the curator of all of these beautiful porcelain pieces. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
This collection is vast. Is that right?
It is. Yes, we have a good 90,000 objects in the whole museum, and I'm responsible for about 20,000, and of those 16,000 are ceramics and 5,000 of those are Chinese export porcelain, which is what we'll be looking at today.
Now, I know a lot of people are going to be running to their cupboards and they're going to be looking at their ginger jars and everything because they really are influenced by some of the high-end pieces that you have in this collection. And the first thing I got to ask you about are, the goose here. Tell me a little bit about the geese.
Well, the geese are funny. They actually were part of the theater of dining in the 18th century. These were made in, let's say, around 1760s or so, and they would have been part of a whole scene that would be set out on a dining table. And you might have moss, and you might have mirrors to look like water, and have these set upon them. And so these would be part of the entertainment for the evening.
Now, these are some of the larger pieces that we see in the collection, but tell me about the collectors themselves.
Leo and Doris Hodroff lived in Minneapolis. They were involved in real estate. Leo is no longer with us, sadly, and they became interested in Winterthur because they knew of our focus on early decorative arts. Ceramics, glass, furniture, silver, things like that. And so through a mutual friend, they made an arrangement for their collection to come to us.
Now, these are all high-end pieces that go way back. Talk to me a little bit about, what we see and the origin of some of these pieces.
Well, in China, they've been making porcelain. They originated it. Japan was very early as well. They've been making porcelain for over 1,000 years. And when we think of porcelain, it's a little different than just calling it just pottery in general. Mm-hmm. It's a high-end ware. It was prized for being white and the light going through it. It was a very elegant material. When it first started coming to the West, it was only collected by the very, very rich, monarchs, kings, queens, nobility. And then gradually, as time went on, in the 1700s, more and more people could afford it until, as we work closer to today, lots and lots of people can buy Chinese wares, and I imagine most of your viewers have Chinese ceramics or have had them during their lifetimes.
Now, when you look at the earliest pieces, they're all Chinese motifs, a lot of symbolism, but it progresses to where they kind of did, you mentioned the nobility and very wealthy people, they did like a custom kind of porcelain. Can you talk a little bit about the early, pure Chinese designs, their meanings, and then into, how they kind of adapted?
Sure, absolutely. From the 1500s onward, you start getting Chinese porcelain coming to the West. And at that point, it was things that would be attractive to a Chinese audience. And so there might be particular arrangements of plants and flowers to reference the different seasons of the year. There might be symbols such as deer, which would mean longevity, long life. 2 carp swimming, which is marital bliss. And a koi or goldfish alone is wishes for wealth, things like that. Those symbols meant nothing to the people in the West. They just saw it and thought, ooh, pretty, and liked it. So the early wares tend to be in Chinese forms. You get teapots, coming over. You get certain types of figures and all. Tea, of course, would come from China as well, and you don't get it in the West until the late 1600s. One of the earliest pieces we have in the collection is a wonderful, huge jar, somewhat like what people might have as a ginger jar today, a sort of oval jar. It's on the wall over here behind us, and it was a special order for the Augustinian order of the church, Catholic order, and they had premises in Macau, which is near Hong Kong, and also in Mexico. So jars like this type went to those two venues. The piece is a special order. We know this in part because it has the Habsburg double-headed eagle on it, which was a symbol of Philip II in Spain, and also it has the heart underneath it that is a symbol of Christ. So that is a real early example of having these special order wares. Many of the other motifs all over the jar, though, are Chinese. It has lions, Chinese lions, for example, that would represent strength and fortitude to the Chinese. To us, it was just a fantastic-looking beast.
And there are other references to religion. There is a figurine of a goddess that many Westerners mistook for Mary, and then there's a Jewish couple, is that right?
It's true, it's true. Yes, behind where we're standing are some figures of a goddess that was known as Guanyin. And in China, she represented motherhood and protection of pregnant women and newborn babies. She was sort of like a hearth goddess in many ways. And she's often shown either standing or sitting holding a child. And to Westerners, not surprisingly, she was a reference to Mary. And they made that connection since they had no idea what the real meaning was, or they chose to just have this figure symbolize it. So we have some examples, several different models of that, including one that's similar to types that were excavated in Mexico City, and they were there in the 1500s, really early.
That's fascinating. Now, we can't wrap the segment without talking about the coat of arms by Robert E. Lee's family.
Yes, the Lees of Cotton, which is a place in England, wanted to have a wonderful special order dinner service. And they probably had slightly different patterns for different courses of the meal. But the wonderful thing about this service is that on the rim, there are two portions that show Chinese-style views of Canton, which was a major port for export of all different sorts of wares to the West. And then two of the other panels on the rim show views of London that are painted in a very European style. In the center are the coat of arms, or the armorial device of this family. And one reason we find them particularly interesting is that they are cousins of, and they're from the same ancestry as Robert E. Lee, who was the Civil War leader here in America. So we like to, when we can, find connections between the objects that are from other countries and pieces that were made or used in America.
So these pieces, while they come from different times and different places, have a lot of stories to tell.
They do.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about them when we return.
Hello, I'm Gloria. I'm the site supervisor at the John Dickinson Plantation. Come back and visit us with 302.
Welcome back. We're at Winterthur looking at beautiful porcelain. Now, Leslie, we have moved into another gallery. This is the Nadler collection. Tell us a little bit about this room.
A lot of the objects that are in this room are Chinese export porcelain that were collected by Daniel and Serga Nadler. And unlike the Hadroffs, the Nadlers were born overseas. Dan was from Alexandria in Egypt, and Serga was born in Tehran, in Iran. Dan is no longer with us, but the couple gathered together a marvelous group of objects that show a different point of view in terms of collecting, as well as being interested in pieces that were made for European and American markets. They also were fascinated by the types of Chinese wares made for the Indian market and the Islamic market, etc.
And when you look at some of the designs, I know that there's a beautiful plate with a gentleman who is on an elephant and he's holding a sword. Can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of images that you see?
Yes, that elephant piece was made for either an Indian person, a person in India of power and wealth, or perhaps for someone from Britain who was over there and as part of the colonial involvement in India. And that type of design is within a border that's a wonderful white on white look that was called bianca sopra bianca. And this is white on white. It's an Italian phrase. And these designs would be used over the centuries to create an almost lacy effect in the decoration.
You can tell that if you were to touch it, which of course we're not going to, that there is a texture to it, kind of like a beautiful pattern that you can enjoy, not just to see, but to feel as well. So I know that there are a lot of these pieces that may have been made in China, but when they were brought to the country that they were going to find their home, they were changed a little bit.
Yes, that's true. And some of the very elegant wares in the early years, say the 1500s, 1600s, and so they would actually put extra mounts on them to transform them into different objects. A ginger jar shape might get a handle and spout and be used as a teapot or a wine pot. Some of the wonderful pieces that we have from the Nadler collection arrived in the 1700s, and they might be a blue and white jug that was very nice and it had Chinese designs on it. But in England, they would paint on brightly colored butterflies and highlight some of the pavilions and make them a little bit more exotic looking.
Now, one of the pieces that really stands out is the dish with the fish.
Oh yes, yes. This is a smallish plate that we have that was part of Ulysses S. Grant's collection. He had ordered it when he and his wife traveled around the world, and they were in Asia, and they special ordered it. The center design with the fish copies a high-end French dinner service by a factory called Limoges. The border, though, with butterflies and other wonderful motifs, is a purely Chinese confection.
When you look at the center of the case, you see a series of platters. Now, those are some of the oldest pieces?
Those actually are not terrible. Well, it depends on your point of view of old. But those are probably made in the late 1700s, and they're a pattern sometimes called Fitzhugh pattern because of a famous dinner service that was ordered by someone in England. But everybody loved those patterns, and in fact, they still get reproduced today. You can buy them in stores. You'll find imitations of those same designs.
I was going to say, a lot of the things that we're seeing today, they have stood the test of time because they continue to be replicated, you know, not just in high-end pieces, but in pieces that you can go into like a Macy's or wherever and find designs like that.
But that's true, and the Chinese then as now were marvelous at targeting particular markets. So they knew that in Sweden, certain types of ornament were very popular, while in England, those designs which might be very elaborate might be less popular. And they would target the designs and sometimes be requested by Western agents to create wares that would be particularly suited to the market where they would be received.
So tell us a little bit about these jars here.
Yes, this is a wonderful group that we've just gathered together recently. This is not from the Nadler collection, although two of the pieces, there's a blue and brown one on the other side, that did come from them. These are a form that's known as a kendi, and the word kendi, K-E-N-D-I, is thought to come from the Hindu word kendika, and it was a name for a type of bottle that was used from the 1300s onward in Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist ceremonies. Up at the top we can see a wonderful Chinese porcelain example with colors that didn't exist before about 1730. So we use the color and the designs to help us date things. And we have a blue and white piece that is between us too. And that is a type of design that stopped being made really by the mid-1600s. And lastly, another piece in here is a Dutch imitation of the Chinese porcelain wares that were coming. And in Holland, rather than using this as part of religious services, it probably was a bottle that was used to serve wine or maybe tea in the late 1600s.
I know whenever you walk through the gallery, there are little descriptions of everything that while you may not know just by looking at it what it is, you know, there's a wealth of information. And I wanted to ask you about the two plates. One is beautiful pastel colors. There's a crown in the middle, and next to it, there's a plate with a bunch of holes. What are those two objects?
That's a terrific, great rarity that we have. And that was made for the governor of Cuba. And he had a special order put in, the crown and all refers to him. And this is a fish dish. So you have the large platter and then the pierced top that goes on top of it. And the fish juices could go down underneath that, and then you could neatly cut and serve the fish.
It's hard to believe that, you know, you would be cutting fish on some of this porcelain. I mean, it's so delicate, and yet, you know, some of these pieces, like you said, date back to the 1700s. I mean, really made well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Porcelain can be very fragile, but it also, in some ways, is more sturdy than other types of ceramics, which can break easily or might stain easily, and this material does not stain.
When people think of porcelain, a lot of them think about, you know, the ginger jar, the blue and white motif. Why is that? It's almost like the dominant pattern, no matter what the design is, but the blue and the white.
That's a great question. Blue is a color, they made it from cobalt. And it could tolerate all different types of temperatures, from the really high temperatures needed to fire the porcelain and the glaze. And so you could make your plate, you could decorate it in blue, fire it and glaze it, and you're done. A lot of the other colors are very sensitive to heat, and so you need lower temperatures to melt them onto the surface. We often call those enamels or overglazed enamels. So colors like, and this upper piece here, we can see many different colors on that. Those were, it took more firings at lower temperatures, so those often cost more.
So we're going to handle some of these pieces when we return.
Hey, I'm Sue Frost, and I wish you an organized new year on the 302.
Welcome back. We're at Winterthur, and we are now getting ready to actually touch things. And Leslie, I have to tell you, my new favorite word is chinoiserie. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, most of this stuff is Chinese or Chinese inspired, but it's called chinoiserie, which is a French word.
Yes, the pieces that were made in China and are in traditional Chinese designs are Chinese wares. Chinoiserie is a French word that became fashionable in the 18th century when all things French were popular anyway. And so, for example, here we're looking at a piece that was made in China, and it is a Chinese porcelain object. And here are imitations that were made in Germany and in England that would be chinoiserie.
Now, when you look at these pieces, you wouldn't know it, but this would have been made by a rhinoceros.
Oh, I know what you're thinking of. This shape, it's sort of odd. If I turn it this way, you may be able to imagine that this is a rhinoceros horn shape. And in China, rhinoceros horn has many different desirable qualities. Some of them medicinal associated with men, and I won't go into any great detail on that, but they would carve real rhinoceros horn and would import those from places where rhinoceri were living. And they also would imitate it in wood and in lacquer work, and in some cases in porcelain. So what we're seeing here is a type of cup that in China would have been used by a great scholar as he was contemplating paintings and calligraphy, and he might have a little wine and sip from it. In the West, we thought, that's a neat shape, never seen anything like that, I want one. And so we would import porcelain ones, sometimes with different colors on them, and sometimes we would add colors once they got here.
Now, it's really beautiful, and when you look at this stuff, like speaking of colors, I mean, a lot of the stuff is blue, but this has a lot of different colors in it.
Yes, I'm going to make us a little room here and move these out of the way. This piece is a Chinese plate that has a range of colors on it that were very popular for foreign markets. And it again has a French name to it. It's called Famille Rose, which is basically the pink family. And around 1730, the Chinese figured out how to make that color. Not all colors that we see today existed going back through eternity, but this shade of pink and the white and some of the purples that you see never existed on ceramics until around 1730. So these wares were being exported to the West, and everyone in the West said, I love that. I want something in those wonderful colors. Sometimes the imitations would be very high style and fancy. Sometimes, and this is a pretty plate, but you can maybe even see it's a little different color. It's a little more of a warm white. And this is being made in Staffordshire, a middle range ware that someone of middle income would have been able to afford it in probably the 1760s, while this one in the 1730s would have been going to nobility and extremely wealthy people.
Now, we mentioned the blue in earlier segments, and the willow pattern is one of my favorites because of the story behind it, of the two lovers that run away and they end up turning into doves. And you see that commonly in spode, which is made today. So talk to me a little bit about the pieces that you have here and the pattern.
Well, you're exactly right about the source of the design. It was a popular one in China and is reproduced on some Chinese porcelain. We don't happen to have a Chinese example, but I brought out three sort of surprising pieces, perhaps, that are imitating that willow pattern. And this teeny tiny plate, for example, that we're looking at, was made as a cup plate. And you would pour your tea into the cup. You would then pour the tea into your saucer so that it could cool. And once it cooled, you would drink it. But here you are with your cup. What am I going to do with that? You put it on a cup plate. And so this is a transfer printed little cup plate that has a pattern copying that Chinese original. This is also a strange looking type, and those of you who like 19th century ceramics may recognize it as something called flow blue. This is coming out of England again, and it looks like a mistake. And maybe it was when it started. Maybe that cobalt blue was fugitive and got out into the glaze. But Americans thought this was great, and they imported a whole range of designs that had this weird sort of hazy blue, almost a fog going over the Chinese design. Lastly, of this group, we have a piece that's made in ironstone china. And this is almost like a restaurant ware. It's very sturdy. It's not a porcelain. If you whack it against the wall, it's going to hold up pretty well, although we try to avoid doing that here at Winterthur. And it has the printed willow pattern in the center. It's picking up a Chinese shape, this sort of leafy shape here, and would have been part of a set that were used as serving dishes.
It's really gorgeous, but it doesn't have the two lovers, the two doves.
And it varies a lot from plate to plate, and people have stories about why they're different.
You have a plate from George Washington.
We do. We do. And we don't let everyone handle it, but we were thrilled to bring it out for the 302. This piece here, this is a Chinese porcelain plate that has what is known as the badge of the Society of the Cincinnati on it. And the Cincinnati were a group of Revolutionary War heroes who were General Lafayette, George Washington, many other famous 18th century military leaders. And they formed a group called the Society of the Cincinnati. Here we can see a figure of fame who's blowing a trumpet to spread the name of the Cincinnati, and then we see the badge of the group here. So this is in the blue decoration. All of the blue designs are painted and they're underneath the glaze, and the colors like the pinks and the gold and the greens, those are over the glaze. So it's a couple steps to make it. But there were several members of the society who ordered services, and they were brought back just at the beginning of America directly trading with China, so after 1784.
And a lot of these pieces are priceless and just gorgeous to look at. And everybody at home is going to say, well, you know, I've got this stuff that my mother gave me or my grandmother. It's been in my family forever. So how do we know if we have something that's just beautiful or something that potentially we should probably take really good care of and maybe make sure that we do pass it on as opposed to donating it?
Well, one nice thing is that many museums will help you look at your objects and think about that. We do it especially for the members at Winterthur, where part of our service is to help them figure out what the pieces are. We don't help with things like valuations, and for that sort of information you would go to appraisers or auction houses. Some antiques dealers are specialists in it, but a local museum often can recommend who you might go to ask those questions. There also are some online resources that you can use.
Just hit up Google and look at the stamp or the image on the back,
Yes.
probably.
Yeah, the marks. Sometimes there'll be a painted mark, or someone will have pressed a mark into the body of it, and that can be really, really helpful.
Well, Leslie, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We'll be right back. For more information on Chinoiserie or anything at Winterthur, you can visit winterthur.org. That'll do it for this episode of The 302. We're going to leave you with some beautiful aerial shots of Winterthur. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302.